Admit him to the insanity.
Yes, please. There we go. He's got a bass clip. Look at that. He's invisible. Larry is invisible.
Our invisible bassist.
Now, there's a very sophisticated background. Look at that. You have a record collection. You have an upright bass. I've got my punk rock Mustang behind me here.
Some keyboard in his house is on fire.
He is now connecting to audio, I see.
What is that, an organ, you think?
It looks like a keyboard. I see smoke emanating from the...
That's what I mean. The house is on fire.
Yeah. Or maybe that's Larry makes an entrance like that, a big plume of smoke, and then he appears.
So it's dry ice. You know, Tom, I was looking for...
There he is. Hey, Larry.
Oh, hi.
Hello. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good.
All right.
Now, where are you located now?
Yeah, I'm in Kingston, New York.
Oh, okay.
You know where that is?
Yes, I go to Bruce Milner in Woodstock for my teeth.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah, I know him. Yeah. What's the name of his practice?
Transcendental.
Right.
Oh.
You know that he was the original keyboard player in Every Mother's Son. He basically financed his dental career on Come On Down to My Boat, Baby.
Yeah, he likes to talk about it. It's great. Yeah. I went to him a couple times, and I can't remember why we ended up switching, but maybe it was an insurance thing or something, but he was great.
Yeah, yeah. I've been going to him since the 70s, quite frankly.
Oh, wow.
I told him I had to stop because I don't want his hands to start shaking while he's doing any of the work.
Right, right. Yours are shaking enough, right?
So why is it important for bassists to have good dental work and good dentists? What is...
You think it's unique to bass players?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we have the best teeth of anyone on the bandstand.
We have to smile because no one else does.
Well, you know, my wife's always saying, because she's the daughter of a doctor, and she always tells me these horror stories about people whose teeth go bad, and then you can get an infection that goes to your brain, you know. So it's
And your heart.
In your heart, yeah. So it's good health in general, right?
Yeah. Matter of fact, wasn't that what caused the late great John Glasscock, who was a bass player in Jethro Tull? I think he had a tooth abscess that he never took care of,
Right.
and it eventually cost him his life. He had a heart infection.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what a way to go.
Good stuff. Actually.
Preventable. Yeah.
All right, so forget about your right hand technique and muting. Let's talk.
Let's talk molars.
Well, the other thing I told my son, because it's like, I think it's also the luck of the draw with genes. You know, if you have good genes for teeth,
Yes.
you pass them on.
Right.
And, you know, some people are just born with better teeth.
So Larry, we actually talked, I think, in 2004 when you did the Fly record, the first Fly record.
Right. Okay, exactly.
With Mark and Jeff Ballard. Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm.
So as David and I like to start off, what the heck have you been doing in lockdown?
Well, probably what everybody else is doing. I mean, you know, there's been some great parts of it with being home with my family, not traveling. My son is 15, so it's, you know, it's a nice time to be home, and you know, it's really the first time I've been off like this since I was probably 16, I think. So,
Wow.
You know, it's like a shift, but I was just saying to my wife, you know, how surprisingly easy it's been in many ways. I mean, we've been really lucky a lot, so I don't want to complain about stuff, but it's been relatively easy as far as like not doing gigs. I mean, I miss the musicians I play with. I miss playing with a drummer tremendously, because I haven't really been doing like sessions with people. Occasionally I've been starting to do more recording now, which has been nice. That's opened up. But before that, you know, a couple streams, you know, stuff like that. But other than that, just practicing, which has been, you know, something I've always really enjoyed. I've never have had to force myself to practice. So, but the interesting thing for me with practicing has been just staying inspired. And, you know, usually the gigs are what kind of guides the practice. And at this point, it's kind of just, you know, allowing things to come in as they as they do, whether it's hearing a certain record or reading something, or I don't know, different forms of inspiration, and just kind of running with it. And so I've been, practicing and teaching online, but kind of same thing everybody else is doing, trying to keep my calluses from getting soft, the physical things, with the double bass, especially, of just like staying physically connected to the instrument. Yeah.
But now your practice regimen is focused mostly on classical music, yes?
I mean, I'd say 50% of it probably,
okay.
With the bow. But I have a hard time saying regiment, because it's not so disciplined. It's pretty fluid in that I kind of move with what I'm interested in the moment, and might stick with it for, some things I keep on doing, but a lot of things I just kind of, get to as more of an etude that I'm trying to, get it ready for performance. And so I'm just kind of using it pragmatically to increase my technique and show my weaknesses in technique. And classical music for me does that really well. It's just, whether it's music written for bass or for any other instrument, it's just kind of like, how do I get this out of this instrument and make it speak? And same thing with electric bass stuff for me. It's always been bringing electric bass stuff to the upright and seeing how can I make this speak on this bigger, thicker stringed instrument, and have the same clarity, that the same drive, that it does on electric bass. So, just finding different sources for that inspiration.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because your former teacher, Ron Carter, was, to my ears, one of those rare bassists who can actually articulate an upright almost like an electric bass. You think of the rhythm and blues records he did with, let's say, Roberta Flack. And then of course Tribe Called Quest has sampled a lot of Ron Carter's bass parts. So kind of interesting how, the electric bass obviously came so much later and really didn't gain respect in the jazz world, let's say, till Jocko came along in '76. And you yourself started out on electric bass with your dad, right? He got you your first instrument, didn't he?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, most of the people my generation and younger started on electric. I think most of us, not all of us, most of us.
Oh,
so we all have that connection, right? And also just what we listened to growing up was definitely, very much informed by that music. That whether it was Jocko or the Beatles or Roberta Flack.
Of course, you were out on the West Coast, so it wasn't just Jocko. We always kid around, it's Jocko and Rocco.
Well,
right in your hometown.
Amazing thing about the East Bay, you think about that moment, late 60s, early 70s, you had Larry Graham, you had Rocco, Paul Jackson.
Of course.
Sly, who played amazing bass. The other great bass player who also played with Sly when he was quite young.
Doug Rush, was it Doug Rush?
Well, him too. No, but he's still around. He's playing. Man, he plays a lot with the pick.
Yeah, I can't think of him. Is it the guy that went on to play with Robin Trower? Or maybe I'm thinking of somebody else.
Maybe he did. I don't know if he played with
Rusty Allen. Are you thinking?
Oh, he's another great one. Yeah. I think Oakland too. Yeah, so I mean, it's really kind of an amazing bass moment. Not only great bass players, but
Jack Cassidy, Phil Lesh, yeah.
Absolutely, Jack Cassidy, right. Who I'm just kind of getting into now, finally, and appreciating him. It took me a second. But, not only great, but changed the way the bass is played, all those guys.
Right.
Yeah.
So your dad was a trumpet player, and he got you your electric bass. Was he looking for somebody to back him up and outline the changes?
Well, he had stopped playing by the time we were born. Actually, he had kind of given it up, but he had instilled in the music bug in myself and my two brothers. And so one brother Steve played guitar and Phil plays trumpet still. So he thought, well, a bass would be a good extra instrument to help we all play together. I mean, it could have been drums, but. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why, but I took the electric bass really quick, and like all of us, like we played in a band right away. Like one weekend of holding the instrument, it's like, okay, yeah, right.
It's only four strings.
It's only four strings.
Right, and you only play one note at a time, so it was you know, pretty easy to like cop stuff off records and play with people. So, you know, the idea of playing in a band was right away, you know, like that's what music's about. And I'm really glad for that, because I think about the opposite of like having to practice by yourself for years before you even get to play with other people. It just sounds so sad to me. And not what it's about. Yeah.
Well, one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on, besides to showcase your brilliance, is the fact that I think electric bass players can learn from acoustic players, and of course, vice versa. And, you know, obviously our first meeting was the fact that I was blown away by part 2 of your interview on the double bass workshop in Britain, where you went up your scales one way, down another, up another, and down another. And I just went, oh my God, I just got my new book. And that's when I sent you the PDF after I finished writing Six String Learn the Fingerboard. It's something that I you know, there's so many different parameters to playing an acoustic bass. I got one in June, and I've been scaring my family for months. I'm very good at Bernard Herrmann's Psycho theme. That I can do with a bow.
Great. Next you can do
However, saying that's the problem. But I wanted to talk to you about your bowing technique. That was sort of like a weird segue into it. But, you know, I was listening to this guy, Edwin Barker.
Oh, Ed Barker, sure, from Boston Symphony, yes.
Right. And his bowing technique is pretty well amazing. And then you listen to the Gleaners and Compassion, and you go, wow, that's pretty flawless as well. And so you're saying that some of your classical practice is really very, very helpful in terms of the arco technique.
Yeah, you know, it's good for everything. You know, that's why I encourage all my students to spend some time with it at some point and get with a classical teacher, because it informs the whole thing. It informs obviously the right hand bow technique, but the left hand becomes really magnified in some ways. Obviously with intonation, but with shifting, moving around this really big fingerboard. You know, and you know, for example, like this idea of improvising fingerings for scales, you know, this kind of came out of that practice of just like trying to feel comfortable with the whole fingerboard, where I can have freedom of movement and express myself in the way that I see fit, sonically, for whatever situation I find myself in the moment as it moves in the middle of the song, you know, not feel tied to a certain area of the bass that I feel more comfortable in than another part. So it just opens up to me the full expression of the instrument and the confidence to move around and to grab notes at any point, because you're cool with it. You know you can get that sound. The intonations can be cool. You can move out of any area of the bass. And then also I think just musically, I mean, you're talking whatever 700 years of music of information that's organized in such a beautiful way, and you know, and jazz definitely comes out of this type of music. You know, it's one of the main inspirations. So just for me, melodically, harmonically, that all that classical stuff really informs my jazz playing too. You know, so sound production. So the bow, to me, it does more than just the right hand. It's a whole way of enlarging your scope of what you're taking in.
And I think also when you're going up and down the neck in various ways, you're beginning to hear intervals a bit differently. You know, when I was at Berkeley a million years ago, when the electric bass was considered a bastard instrument, as a matter of fact, John Neves once said to me that the electric bass is not a valid musical instrument. However, so many of my teachers saying, get your ears in shape. Ear training became ear straining, but at the same time, you know, with your approach of being anywhere and being comfortable is directly related to ear training.
Well, that's true. I mean, ear training is like you have to hear the note before you play it. So, that's, intonation is such a huge thing with the upright bass, right? I mean, you want to play it in tune and it's not easy, but one of the things that really helps is hearing the pitch before you play it so that you can adjust right away if it's slightly off. And, just that's another part of ear training, I think, or, hearing it and feeling is it really in the center of the pitch, and that's another type of ear training. It's not really perfect pitch, but you get to kind of that on the bass where you can not only hear it, but you feel the bass vibrating when it's really in the center.
Yeah.
And once you can do that really well, then you can start to play with it. And, if you want to play it a little flat, you're in control of that. You can just more control over the instrument.
Yeah. Now, going back to the solo record, The Gleaners, which I think everyone should pick up. It's really incredible. And, to me, it couldn't have been better recorded. I think ECM is probably the premier record company, like Blue Note was in the 50s. And they know how to lovingly, just capture everything. And the sound was great. Did you do an interesting tuning on the Gleaners, or is that just EADG?
Yeah, part of the discoveries for me while I was preparing that record we're checking out different tunings on the bass, and I just kind of experimented for a while, and found some that I liked, and they typically were all lower pitched, not tuning up. When I tuned up, it was interesting, but sonically it didn't quite move me the same way. But when I would tune things down, and then if I would tune them so they weren't in perfect fourths, so maybe I'd combine thirds and fourths. All of a sudden, obviously the harmonics changed, but just the way the bass vibrates changed, and it just inspired me to play some different music. And so I would, retune or detune or whatever, use scottatura, and then play it first without even really thinking of.
Oh, Dave, did he freeze?
Actually, I would start to get comfortable. Can you see me okay?
Yeah,
okay, you're in. Yeah, you just froze for a second.
But the beautiful
Okay.
I can edit, so it doesn't seem like it.
Oh, great. Yeah, so what I noticed was like I would play something and hear something different come out of the instrument, and then I would kind of learn how to play with that tuning as well. So I did know what notes I was playing eventually, but at first it's kind of a way to kind of come to the instrument anew, and say, wow, I would never have played that in a standard fourth tuning, so yeah, I did experiment with that. So like on the Tune the Gleaner, I think that's tuned low, high, D, G, D, F sharp.
Wow.
So that's kind of a really different one. Yeah.
Now, is that, did you basically write that for that, what is it, Jean Millet, the picture? Did you? Oh,
well, you know how these titles work. It's like it's a seed of an inspiration, right? And I saw this great movie by Agnes Varda called The Gleaners and I, and it connected with not only the times that we were in, but just what I had been thinking about while practicing. So yeah, it came out of that, but just as a seed.
As a thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you talk about retuning, because tomorrow we have an interview with Mike Manring, who is like the king of tuning or detuning or
right,
whatever he's doing.
Right. I mean, the thing was, when I started to do some gigs after the record came out, solo concerts, the tuning thing becomes kind of an issue because, it kind of breaks up the flow, and, you gotta, it takes a second. I've gotten much quicker with tuning up the bass now, which has been really good, but in the studio, it's easy to do that, and also I was going to say about the sound, with ECM, that is definitely Manfred Eicher. He is ECM, and he's a former bass player, and his his natural affinity to the instrument is incredible, and not to all instruments, but to double bass particularly. I mean, it's just always recorded great on all the records, you know. And I grew up loving those records in part because of the bass always sounded so great on it.
Yeah.
So, you know, he can go into, you know, he's a producer, but he can also go into the studio, move some mics around, and really, you know, change the sound dramatically. He's got so much experience and knowledge in that.
Well, think about all the ECM recordings you actually did. You've been a friend of ECM forever. I mean, Wolfgang and Paul Moty.
Yeah, and I think the first ones I did were with Charles Lloyd, maybe. But yeah, and you know, so we developed a relationship over the years, and so that's how the record just came out of a conversation about the possibility of it.
Well, that version of Lotus Blossom, which is on The Water Is Wide,
right?
Just a fabulous sound.
That was a great record. That was the first time I had played with Charles, and I had played with Billy Higgins when I was a kid. You know, 18.
He's a West Coast guy, right?
He was in LA, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, he's always one of my favorite drummers. So to get to connect and play with him again was really amazing, and to do some gigs after the record came out. And, you know, so I was playing with Brad at that time, and we were out in LA playing, I think at Largo, this club in LA. And so we did that record during the days, you know, and it was just a great one of those, you know, when you go into a recording and the vibe is right away, you know, it just, everything comes together. And I think, you know, the sound kind of matched that energy that we were in all at the same time.
And it's scary how he can reproduce that rainbow studio sound anywhere.
Right. Well, that was done in another great studio actually out there in LA. Yeah, a studio called Cello. Yeah, good engineers, you know, good mics, good musicians, you know. It's you know, most records should sound better than they do. It's funny. It's like, it's not rocket science really, but I mean, yeah, but it is everything coming together, right? It has to be, the sound has to be there from the instrument, from the player, from the hands, and then it has to be captured, you know, thoughtfully and carefully, with care.
Yeah. Tom, you chat. I got to let one of the dogs out.
Well, one of the interesting thing about the Gleaners record is you think about bass players, we're always in the studio with other musicians. We're part of a gang, part of a posse. What was the experience of being all by your lonesome in there?
Well, I wish I had talked to you before I did it, because that's the one thing I didn't think about, you know, because I was just concerned with the music, you know, and
sure.
But once I started playing in the studio by myself, I was like, oh my God, this is really bizarre, because like you said, bass players were always reacting, you know, it was
right
to something else. And so that was a real kind of a bizarre moment where I had to come to terms with it pretty quick, because, you know, it's like 2 days to record. It's very quick the way they make records. So once I could hone in on the sound of the instrument in the room, this was at Avatar in New York City. It's not a huge room, but it's you know, it's got a nice sound in it. So once I could feel and hear the sound coming back to me in the room, that was the inspiration. That was what I was playing to. That was what I was reacting to, instead of a drummer or piano player.
The tune Pettiford. I assume you have a strong affinity for Oscar Pettiford.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's one of his unreleased or just not re-released recordings. I think it's in the orchestra. And he does this song called Deep Passion. Are you familiar with that song?
Lucky Thompson, yes, very much.
Right,
I love this song. We used to play this with Fly, actually. I love that song. Yeah.
I'm going to, just to let you know, I'm going to play your version of Pettiford, and then I'm playing Deep Passion.
Oh,
yeah. Well, it's one of my favorite songs of all. It's a desert island for me.
It is a very passionate song, right? It's I mean, just the composition, but also the way it's played, for sure. But Oscar Pettiford, is funny, was just a fortunate happenstance of getting one of his records very early on for me, before I really knew so much. I mean, I knew Ray Brown, I knew Ron Carter, but not too many other bass players. And somehow I saw the record and I liked the cover, and I bought it. And I just connected with his clarity, you know, his melodicism, just the way he brought the bass out front. And it just captured me back when I was, whatever, 13 years old. But yeah, I've continued all my life to really have a lot of, you know, respect for him and what he brought to the instrument and what he brought, you know, to me, he's one of those seminal figures between swing and bebop, you know,
Yes.
who really helped bring us into a whole nother era of playing.
Yeah, I think you could put, what's his name? The guy who did Jack the Bear with Duke
Yeah,
Ellington.
Jimmy Blanton.
Jimmy Blanton, and then Pettiford
Yeah,
is like the next step.
exactly. Then you got Ray Brown, you know, so yeah, absolutely.
Another thing I want all of our listeners to sort of get is that to be a consummate musician, you just can't listen to the idiom you just listened to. Do you know what I mean?
Well, you know, this is what I'm always saying about what's the beauty of the bass is, and it's great for electric bass players to know too. You know, the bass's function in every style of music is the same, right? What we give the music, we show the form, we show the movement of the harmony. By playing it, the rhythm feels better than if we weren't playing. And then there's all this melodic content, this counterpoint, this counterline that's happening throughout the whole tune. And whether it's repeated like in pop music or it's always changing like in jazz, the function is the same. So, you know, bass players are a great spot in the band to recognize, oh yeah, all music is the same, really, and that our sources of inspiration are endless. So it's a really great position to kind of see that and to see, wow, I can go to Bach, I can go to Jimi Hendrix, I can go to Delaney and Bonnie, I can go to, I don't know, you know, it's wide open.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you know, early in your career, you work with many legacy artists: Joe Henderson, Stan Getz, Jack DeJohnette. You mentioned Paul Moty. Now, you think about all the bass players they made great records with: Ron McClure, Ron Carter, Eddie Gomez, Charlie Hayden. The list goes on. When you work with them, did you make a conscious effort to reference those players? Did you you know, thinking about, you know, their history and then you coming on board as a younger player?
Well, I think that was stuff I had done earlier. You know, like I had kind of soaked up a lot of influence, those people you mentioned, and you know, went through that whole process of, you know, some of it was transcribing, but more so of just figuring out through listening a lot of what they've given, you know, to the bass, and sonically, harmonically, rhythmically. So I'd kind of gone through that with most of those people. And so when I went to play with the drummers who may have played a lot with those bass players, I wasn't consciously thinking of it, but, you know, like at certain moments, something might inspire me to think of one of those guys and it might just come out. But, you know, that's the thing is, like, you know, you take all these influences, you sift them through this thing, and eventually it's you at the end. And, you know, like I could listen to certain records and say, oh yeah, that's I got that from Charlie Hayden, or I got that from Ron Carter, you know. But I'm hoping that other people don't really hear it like that. They just hear it as this kind of this thing that becomes me.
Yeah. But also it shows the importance of knowing the history of the instrument. Really.
I think so. I mean, every once in a while I run into somebody who has no idea of the history and they still kind of play really good. So I think it's important. You know, and I think it informs us. It helps us develop our own sound eventually. But, you know, I guess, you know, we're at kind of a different point now where there's so much information available so easily that it can be a bit overwhelming, and it might be a bit of a distraction, you know. I think when I was a kid, I had maybe one record coming in a month or every few weeks, you know, and now you have millions of records available on a click. But to me, it really helps to study. You know, it's like anything else you try to do well. If you want to cook something well, you just go to somebody who does it better than you. Right. They're doing the same thing. How to walk on a blues. Okay, I'm going to listen to Paul Chambers. I'm going to listen to Ron Carter. Listen to Jimmy Garrison, whatever. Yeah. It's like, why wouldn't you do that if you're trying to learn how to do something? It's like, oh yeah, let's go to the source and see, oh yeah, they're doing that. And then I can, oh yeah, I can do that too. I can kind of get to that, you know? So it's kind of an obvious way to learn how to play music. But I guess the only drawback would be if you got super hung up on one person and kind of pushed away everybody else.
Yeah, well, that sort of happened. We were talking about that in the 70s when Jocko came along, and then everybody added that bridge pickup, right? And that was the end. You know?
Right. And that's the thing, like nobody can sound like Jocko, no matter how hard they try, you know.
But you mentioned
because he listened so much.
Right. Well, he was just a great musician. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you another question. You know, one of the other reasons that it's important for our bass guitar channel show to have upright players is Tom and I were talking at one point. I said, if two 10-year-old boys were given, one was given an electric bass, the other was given an upright, the electric bass player would be given links to YouTube, and the upright bass player would be given Edward Nane or Samandel.
Right, right. You know, right. I wonder if that's still, I think it's changed, you know, because of the internet. But I mean, I have this issue with classical and jazz on the double bass, you know, the way it's taught in schools and that how it's still extremely separated. There's these, you know, these walls, you know, physical walls too, but mental walls between the departments, you know, like the jazz bass player, a student, you know, might be able to take one lesson a month with the classical teacher. Never does the classical bass student go take a lesson with the jazz teacher. You know, it's just like this very territorial thing that to me does a real damage to both music. You know, it's like, it's not helping either music to grow. And I mean, I think it's a little better now than it probably used to be. Like you said, of the, you know, the way that the bass guitar was viewed, you know, at Berkeley even, you know, but, you know, it still exists. It's maybe a little less in Europe, but in the States, I still find this real distinction between the departments and this. I just don't feel like, I mean, I'll just say it. I mean, I just don't feel like the classical musicians really understand what we're doing as jazz musicians. They think we're kind of just playing whatever we want to play off the top of our head. And so they don't really see the relevance to it for their own music and how it can inform their own playing. Not everybody, but in general speaking.
Sure,
you know?
sure.
To me, it does it really disfavor to helping each music grow into the 21st century. It's really too bad.
Well, I remember a story where a friend of mine was telling me that he was talking with Gary Carr, and Gary Carr, you know, he's sort of on the outside of things, even when he's on the inside, but he said, I like to paint myself into a corner and then try and find a way out.
He to me is the great exception, right? And he always appreciated jazz bass players, connected like with Richard Davis, and like they would play and you know, so yeah, he's the great example to me, and how it probably informed his classical playing. You know, just like with Edgar Meyer, how his you know, bluegrass country's music informed, or Stevie Wonder, you know, the vocal way of his approach. You know, it's just so obvious. You know, but in academia, it's very confined, and to me, it can be very limiting. And so I'm always asking the jazz bass students to take some lessons with the classical teacher, but I wish they would do the reverse too a bit more often, you know, or show up to the clubs, you know, and see what you know, have some interest in what we're really doing up there.
Yeah, it would certainly help them. That's for sure. Loosen them up a little bit.
Yeah.
But also, you have to also take into consideration now with YouTube, and, you know, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. You can now actually watch the masters, you know, especially some of the, so many of the jazz programs from the 60s that were on in Europe that we never saw here.
Right.
And even just watching vintage clips from like the Steve Allen show and things that you can really get a college education, you know, watching classical and jazz players on YouTube, whereas you might have fumbled listening to records, your hand positioning might have been wrong, but now you can see, you can see a Ron Carter, you can see a Charles Mingus, and actually how they articulated and incorporate that into your own repertoire.
Absolutely. No, it's a whole new ballgame with that. That's the great part of the internet, right? Of being able to see all these people that are alive anymore. I mean, obviously, it's not like seeing them in person, but it's what we got, and it's the next best thing right now. So, yeah, I think that in collaboration with a good teacher, I mean, I think, teachers are really important at some point, like at certain points in people's developments, whether it's electric bass or upright bass. And, we kind of need some clarification because we see things. Also, it's like when you hear a record when you're a kid, you might love it, but then you hear it 10 years later and you still love it, but you hear so much more to it. Like, it grows as you grow. And I think, teachers are really helpful in pointing things out. Like, did you see that? Why did he do that? How did he do that? What's going on in the rest of the band that made the bass player want to play that note or that rhythm? Kind of help push the understanding a bit more so that, we can go beyond ourselves and kind of get some other information coming in.
Yeah, wow. Now, going back, one of your more successful, obviously, collaborations is with Brad Meldau and Jorge Rossi, and then later Jeff Ballard. When you guys first started at the Village Gate, did you have any idea that the trio would be so successful as it was?
No, it was just a gig. It was a gig that was really fun, and it just kind of, the timing was good because Brad got a record deal with Warner Brothers.
Right.
They were behind him, and so we were able to make records really regularly, and then go tour. Not that they helped us tour, but the records were out there in a nice way internationally, and so we were touring really a lot and just kind of hitting it hard, and it just connected on many levels musically, but also just the way the audiences would show up. And so it just, it was the right moment for that. And that Brad was also willing to make the investment in that this was a steady band. It wasn't a band that, oh yeah, Larry can't make it, so I'm going to call somebody out. It was just like we all committed to it, and especially him, of writing music and basing this idea of a trio around, at first, me and Jorge. So it's really also Brad's dedication to it, for sure, not just our dedication.
And that trio also got a lot of radio support on NPR and satellite radio, which is so very important because it's so hard to hear jazz on the radio.
Right. Yeah. Very little jazz on the radio anymore. Sure. But this was, I don't know, that first record might have came out in '94 or something like this. So it's almost like a different time. I think it's really some different. The internet was what it was back then. It was very not much part of it. So yeah, it's a different time now.
Yeah.
Now you live in a very bass-centric part of the country. You had Gary, may he rest in peace. You got Steve Swallow, Tony Levin. You ever do hey, let's bass players get together kind of thing?
We don't, bass players, we stay away from each other.
Yeah. You don't want them taking your gigs.
Yeah. Well, it's actually the opposite. I mean, I think bass players, when we do that, we don't do that really. When we're home, we're kind of in our own little bubbles. But and Dave Holland is another one up here, right? One of the first ones to come up here. But I find on the road, when you do run into bass, but we're the ones that do hang out. Other instrumentalists may not as much. I think we can enjoy each other. I think also, it's there are enough gigs for bass players, so there's not that extra weird thing about fighting over gigs and stuff. And I think we all appreciate what each other does, and we can all kind of see different ways of using the instrument and appreciate different styles of playing. Yeah, so
that's true. It's funny, we were talking with Freebo yesterday, and he was talking about the first time he met Jocko. And it's a great story. He's saying that he walked up to Jocko, they started talking gear and stuff, and then he goes, "So Jocko, how many hours a day do you practice? And Jocko goes like this. I only practice 2 hours, but it's really intense.
Yeah, that's what it's about, right? Yeah, it's not about the number. Yeah.
Yeah.
I met Jocko late in his life, early in my life. I was playing a gig in Las Vegas when I was still in high school with the great sax player Charles McPherson.
Oh, yeah.
And we're playing in one of these casinos, had like a jazz club in it. This must have been 83, 84. And Jocko came in. He was playing in town somewhere. And, I heard his first rap. I was really into Jocko, but, that's what everybody was. So he came in. He wanted to sit in on upright. So he came on stage, and Charles, who's like a really like stone cold bebopper, called Cherokee, really, really up tempo version of Cherokee, and Jocko was like hanging, like dealing, for like maybe 5 minutes or so, and then he got tired and gave me the bass back. But I got to talk to him a bit after that, and it was just an amazing thing to meet somebody who you've heard so deeply, and he was super great, super with like avuncular, fatherly, like really caring in a really beautiful way. Very nice. Very thoughtful cat. And then I saw him a couple times later because he had moved to San Francisco for a few months. But this is near the end of his life. But I mean, what a great example to me of a guy who soaked up all music, and figured out how to put it all together and make it so distinctly his own. Sonically, harmonically, rhythmically.
And it's funny how many styles, you're right. Really, my favorite solo of his is an Ian Hunter tune, All American Alien Boy. That's a great solo.
Yeah, on a rock record, yeah.
Yeah. So even Ian Hunter got it. Right, Tom?
Well, that was, I mean, that's kind of what introduced Jocko. That was the Amazing Year of Bass. That was 1976. When Jocko joined Weather Report. And then, of course, he did the Ian Hunter record, which introduced him to a wide audience, and again, this is the days before internet and things like that.
Yeah, it was just like this boom, 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 with Bright Side's Life, Heavy
Yeah,
Weather,
sure.
his solo record. It was like, man, give me a break, it's just like just piling on this stuff that's like changing the way the instruments play. But, I was also really into Stanley at that time. Jeff Berlin was another one who was really at the same moment kind of came up with his own way of playing.
Right.
Swallow, of course, came up with an extremely unique way of playing. So
he and I went to Berkeley together. We're going to be interviewing him, I guess, in a couple of weeks.
Oh, Jeff?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, another cat who, to me, has such a strong identity, came out hitting hard, in his own unique way.
Jewish kid from Great Neck. What can you do?
Can't keep him down.
Yeah.
Well, I've always said, Tom Semioli, David Gross, Jews and Italians, we are the record.
With our overbearing mothers. So, Larry, let me ask you now, you talk about the challenges of playing a solo all by yourself in the studio. There are also challenges playing in a trio and challenges in backing up or accompanying a singer, such as Rebecca. Let's talk about that. Talk about your role in the trio as opposed to, let's say, a traditional small group with horns and things like that.
Well, what I always say about that, once you kind of get your shit together, is that it's really about whom you're playing with rather than what instruments you're playing with.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the personalities and the way that you interact with those particular people rather than the instrument that they're playing.
Right.
Eventually. I mean, I'm kind of being more broad about it because, there are certain specific things that change. If there's no chordal instrument, then it's like I automatically am aware of that, so I have to maybe make the harmony a bit more clear.
Like Fly, when Fly.
Yeah, but even in that, that's another example of something that comes up in that band because, when we don't really play freeze in that band. We everything's kind of, based on compositions and
right.
But I think sometimes what we're what I'm aware of, like, I don't want the audience, the listener, to think that we're just kind of playing free. Like, I want them to have a sense of form, in that there is a circular motion to this form, and that, so, not that I'm trying to hit everybody over the head with that, but I am trying to bring a certain clarity to the harmonic movement, so that it doesn't just sound like we're playing anything random.
Right.
You know?
Well, you can look at that Paul Motion record you did with Rebecca. What was it? On Broadway #4.
Right.
Make a tune like High, Wide, and Handsome, which I picked, where it's just you and Chris Potter, and for the life of me, I know they say Paul Motion plays drums, but he doesn't play drums. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he plays himself. He plays what I mean, but playing with him, when that record was done, we were playing quite a bit in town at the Vanguard, fairly regularly. And what I experienced with him really early on was, people know of his playing with Bill Evans, with Keith Jarrett. It's more open, free. But there's also this, once you play with him, you feel this root of something much more ancient in his playing. That to me is, I think of it as really like almost pre-bebop or early bebop. There's this center to the sound, to the beat, even when he's playing completely free, that the bass can latch onto and connect with. So there is this center to it. And so he's got both. He's one of those magical guys, Charlie Hayden was like that too, could play really loose, but it had this center to the beat. Even if it wasn't like a steady rhythm, there was this underlying pulse. And that's what Paul always had. And whether we're playing in time or rubato, it was a beautiful thing because it had that. So I think, younger musicians might miss out on that. They might think, oh, I'm just going to play rubato and play loose and play kind of cymbally, and, there's no bottom to their sound or something. And they're missing what Paul had, which was so connected to the past, but he had moved it on to something completely his own.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great.
These drummers are really interesting, like him and Jack DeJohnette too, I think, who is another one who is kind of at heart a very free drummer too. And but when you play with them, you sense this older part of their playing that's in everything that they play. And I always, want younger drummers to appreciate that, so they don't think it's all this other stuff that's kind of more airy without the bottom. It's like a bass player who does it. It's like you need both. You need the air, you need the earth.
Yeah.
And without it, it's like something is not quite right.
Well, while we're talking about Jack DeJohnette, let me just let one of my dogs in.
Dogman.
Come on, Godfrey.
Yeah, I actually caught a couple of those gigs at the Vanguard. Paul used to have them on Monday nights.
Yeah, we used to play. He had, kind of when I started playing with Paul, he had decided to stop touring. So that was his main thing, was just to play in town.
I think he lived right around the block from the Vanguard, as a matter of fact.
Well, he lived uptown. He lived in the Upper West Side. But,
did he? Okay.
Yeah.
So when you were talking, Jeff, or rather Jack DeJohnette, that record Hudson, it to me, recently it seems there are a number of bands that are picking up some of the pop repertoire and turning them into standards, and no better than Lay Lady Lay or some of the other tracks on that album, Hudson.
Yeah, I think for all of us, for Jack and John and Medeski and Schofield, we all grew up listening to all that music, and then all of us being in this area where so much of that music was formulated and played post Woodstock. It's all been a part of our listening and what we've taken in. So it just seems like a natural thing. I mean, you have to find tunes that have enough harmonic meat to them to inspire, a repetition of the cycle, so that we can solo over them and, kind of pull them out a little bit. So, you just have to find the right tunes. Not every pop tune is going to work. And especially, if you try to find, it's a lot harder now if you try to you know, let's say I'm going to do a jazz record of pop tunes from 2020, you know, good luck. You know, but you know, we talk about Dylan and Joni and you know Jimi Hendrix. You know there's enough harmonic material to deal
Right.
with. So yeah, it's you know, and also I know all of it. Jack, you know, he's part of that era, you know, really. So he, you know,
Sure.
the stuff he did with Miles was bringing that music into the jazz conversation. So yeah, I mean, it's just all music that we love to hear and love to play, and we tried to find a way to do it that was unique to the four of us, you know. And that band came out of a gig that we all did up here. I think it was at the Bearsville Theater.
Okay.
Some benefit concert, and it was like, oh yeah, this is really nice. This combination is nice, you know. And you know, for me, it was fantastic to play with those guys every night.
Oh, I bet. And Jack too is up in the Woodstock area, right?
Yeah, he's been up here since the early '70s. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I think he did some live streaming a couple months back with
Matt
Matt Harrison.
Yeah, he told me that. Yeah, I saw Jack recently. We did a record together about a month ago, I guess. So he's hanging in there. He's doing good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So one other thing, going back to technique, I had forgotten in my playing about open strings. All right. So in June, I get this tub. I'm trying to negotiate it, and I'm going, oh, open strings are my friends. Care to comment?
That's exactly, you know, it's funny because, like you said, we're double bass players are steered towards these classical method books written 100, 200 years ago. And while they're helpful, they're also kind of outdated in some ways of thinking, you know, especially for a jazz bass player. I mean, this is the whole thing with me, you know, classical music is written out, jazz is not. Our ability to navigate on the spur of the moment and move with the music is different. Classical music, you work out your fingerings by yourself or with a section. You show up at the gig, and that's what you do. I mean, obviously, every night's different, but fundamentally, the bowings and the fingerings are the same.
Right.
Jazz, no. Right? So it's just our ability to kind of be able to move at any moment and anywhere and get the sound and intonation that we want and the attack, everything, you know, takes a different, I think a different learning process would be helpful to us, you know. So that's why I encourage students to do this thing, like you say, that improvising your fingerings. And in the process of doing that, you are going to close off some open strings, because that's one way. But in the process, you're also going to open up some strings, and you see, oh man, this made it so much easier to move through the bass organically or holistically, like slowly move up and down instead of just going up to the G string, up to G string, back down to G string, over.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
And so once you realize that, you say, oh man, it gave me a nice open long note that's in tune, and it gave me a chance to shift. And now I'm in this new part of the bass, and I can move up here. You know, so. Yeah, open strings are definitely our friends, and you know, yeah, you have to be able to play an A on the E string and play it closed to be able to have confidence to do that. But in the course of a real playing situation, I'm using open strings all the time to help me move through the instrument.
Yeah.
That was a great technique. Obviously, if you read the charts on Standing in the Shadows of Motown, Jamerson, that was his thing, to switch to jump registers and to get into different positions. James always used the open string on all those records.
I mean, you know, if you go back to him and then, you know, Shamad and Chuck Rainey and all these great bass players, you know, they're all coming out of upright bass.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
You know, whether they played it like Jamerson or they just heard it a lot. You know?
Right.
And, it's like drummers to me from the rock and roll, you know, early drummers and rock bands in the 60s, you know, they weren't listening to other rock drummers, obviously. You know, they were listening to jazz drummers, you know, so there's always that connection of the role of rock and roll coming from jazz, coming from swing. in early, that's why that music sounds so great to me, you know.
Charlie
and then
Watts.
slowly,
Yeah.
Charlie Watts, Ringo, you know, Bono.
Bill Ward from Black Sabbath swung.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
You
look,
know?
Tom and I have always said there's the bass players pre-Jocko and post-Jocko.
Yeah, that's another.
There's really a
yeah.
difference.
Right.
I mean, think about Willie Dixon. Pretty much every rock and roll bass player out of Britain who was listening to the blues grew up on Willie Dixon.
Right. That's
Is
right.
there a blues riff that Willie Dixon did not write? I don't, you know.
Well, he
yeah,
said
I
he
mean,
did.
I hope he got some money. I hope he had some money at the end of his life. 'Cause he deserved it. Yeah, no, it's a different thing, and I think, you know, in the 70s, 80s, you know, we get more into the rock and less of the roll. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it's always finding like that's why it's so. We talk about history, you know, like, yeah, we want to be a contemporary bass player, right, or contemporary musician, but we also need to inform ourselves so that it maintains a certain groove and vibe, you know, which to me comes from the past. And the further we get from it, the more possible it is that we lose it. So even more reason to kind of continue to do research to check out what this all came out of, which is primarily blues, you know, music. So it just informs our rhythmic part mostly, of phrasing, the way we place the beat, so that it has a connection to that and just feels better.